Yeah, follow that. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna do some. I don't really know what I'm going to do now because I really will struggle to follow that, so I'm not going to try to. It's 1:15. Are we on? We're behind it, are we? We're on time. Wow. Okay, well, if we're on time, I'm going to try to keep us on time. My privilege is to have some final comments on the conference. And I've been attuned to what's been going on over the last few days, and I've been boring people, asking people how they're getting on. Are you enjoying it? Are you learning? Are there things in this that are working for you? Because I'm very conscious in our centre, we have a constituency, and you're it. And it's very important that we listen to you and we support you in the day-to-day that you're involved in, the difficult work that you take on, the challenging circumstances. So what I've been trying to do is pick up on that, and also what our speakers have talked about and what's been presented to us in the various workshops. So it's really actually an impossible job. So I was looking at it as a typical academic. I was saying, well, how can I conceptualize this, and how can I add this up together in some sort of a neat model that works for everybody and we can bring it forward? And it's not really possible, I've decided. So what I'm going to do is just something a little bit more personal based on what I think myself, and I'm going to try to do it in 5 minutes. And maybe it might resonate with some of you, and hopefully it will. But I think there were a series of messages that were probably intelligible to everybody and probably relatively consistent across the few days. And interestingly, Kenny Egan referred to shopping, and that was one of the thematics over the few days, which is interesting, and how important shopping is in our lives, or not. But maybe one of the most important things for me, and I have to be careful here because I don't overstate it, but there is something about the word simple and approaching the problems we have and thinking about simple solutions, accepting that problems are complex, but that actually there are very simple things we can do in our day-to-day lives around this topic of engagement. And it is supported, if you want, from, and you might say, well, that's all fine, and that sounds very glib. Well, from an academic and from a theoretical point of view, there's this idea of parsimony, which is that, the best theories are parsimonious. They have the smallest number of concepts in them and the smallest number of relationships in them, so that you're actually understanding something in the most simple way you can. And again, that point that most of these things can be dealt with and thought about in simple ways. Interestingly, this morning I thought it was nice from Nora. She talked about transparency. So I think there's something about being simple and transparent and how we think about the idea of engagement. It can be complex, but if we think about how we build towards that simplicity. And if you heard what Kenny said, he said, I got into my car, I turned the key. That's what I'm talking about. And it's attending to that and how important that is in our lives, in our work around engagement. I think probably everybody would agree, and again, it sounds a little bit glib, but just to remind ourselves about relationships. Relationships are at the heart of the family support enterprise. Relationships are at the heart of engagement at all levels. The relationship at the individual level between policymakers and practitioners, between agencies. And how do we work and how do we sustain them and how do we think about them? But again, we have to attend to them. And within relationships, the significance of communication and how we communicate with one another. And I was struck particularly by Andy's talk yesterday and the idea of practicing communication. It isn't the case that we can all communicate well. Why do we have relationship therapy? Why do we have couples who go into those situations? Because they're struggling with their communication. So we might say it's the most natural thing in the world, and maybe it is, but it doesn't always operate in that way. So we do have to attend to how we communicate. How do we listen to one another? Do we listen to one another well enough? And again, when we think about engagement, we have to think about what we say and what we hear. And whatever about what we do with what we hear, we have to start there. We have to hear these messages and give these messages well. And at the workshop I was looking at yesterday, we had a really nice presentation from Anik around the idea of making stories of volunteering available to people as a method for communicating about volunteering, as opposed to training courses. So again, what Kenny was doing here, he was telling us a story. He was telling us his story. So the importance of stories in communication. Now, I see myself as a social scientist, and that's that broad. And part of me is drawn to quantification and indicators and so on, but part of me is also drawn to stories and the significance of stories as a means of understanding each other. And maybe that's the next point, particularly when we think about, well, if we want to engage people, we have to understand them. We have to understand their experiences. And in Anne's talk yesterday, I'm impressed with her talk and her career, because there's a career dedicated to an extended attempt at understanding communities. So if we think about that, how hard do we work at this idea of understanding where somebody else is coming from? And in a sense, that leads us on to the question of difference. So difference and diversity was one of the things that came up a lot over the couple of days. So in a sense, talking to ourselves, I'm talking to you, we're all the same at some level. We have a commonality, a common experience. But by the same token, within this group, there's diversity, there's difference, there's different opinions. And I probably would appreciate over time, maybe our work needs to be more about diversity, more inclusive. I'd like to see more black people here, more people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. I'd like to see people from with disabilities in the audience of various kinds. I'd like to see that. And that's the point about, I suppose, you might think you talk to yourself and you understand, well, that's fine, but it's only when you talk to somebody who's different to you, who tells you something that you hadn't thought about, who makes you see things in a different sort of a way. And we don't get that from talking to each other all the time. We're just confirming our own biases and our own assumptions to a degree. So difference and thinking about difference as a key issue in engagement is significant from what I picked up. A different kind of a point, but something about the idea of examples in our lives and role models. So again, I sat over there and I looked and I saw Kenny talking. I'm referring to Kenny a lot here, but he was just exemplifying the point for me. There were 4 or 5 young people, but there were probably 10, 11, 12. I have never seen in a conference the attention that they gave Ken Egan. So they gave him the attention because for them, he was a significant role model. We talked in the mentoring from Bernardine and Carmel yesterday about the idea of role modeling. How do we role model what we do? So engagement is something about setting an example for people. And again, attending to how we do that in our work. Something that hasn't been present enough, I think, in the day or day and a half is something around conflict. We've, tipped around it a little bit, and it's, again, a very comforting space to be in. But let's face it, there are significant differences between us in terms of how we understand the nature of society, our values, our core beliefs, the individualist versus the collectivist, and so on. And this room, I suppose, contains people who are probably more on the left of centre, if you want to call it that, if you take those kinds of cleavages. But then there are other kinds of cleavages. There are cleavages to do with the nature of abortion, for example, something that's out there at the moment in our society. So what I'm trying to say to you is that, there are conflicts. And when we talk about engagement, we shouldn't run away from conflict. Conflict should be really, really a kind of an accepted part of what we're going to have to deal with. Whether that's a conflict about individual personalities or values or whatever it is, and not to be afraid of it. Again, values. And again, I'm interested to read this morning that Fianna Fáil is now the most popular party with the electorate. Now, it was the last time, but it's retained it. Now, so again, in this room, there's a set of people who would have particular sets of values and interests. And maybe there's a few Fianna Fáil voters in the audience. I don't know if there is or not. I'm not even going to make a joke about it. But the point I'd make more broadly is it the case that Fianna Fáil and the people who will vote for them in the morning would agree with some of the points and some of the orientations and the things that matter to this group of people? So again, it's this question of talking to ourselves or not. And if it is the case that other people have other values which say it's about individuals, it's about profit, and that's all that really matters, there's no point in us burying our heads in the sand and working within the space we are. We have to start engaging that debate. And that's where Nora's work on advocacy is coming into play and thinking about these kinds of issues. I was reminded by Carmel Devaney to remember what Andy said, which was not to apologise. We do not need to apologise, I can't say it, apologise for family support. And that's something we've had to do in this centre for a long time, which is to push the case and to argue the case. So in terms of our engagement, we need to be engaged at that level of saying, no, this is very significant and very important, and we are not going to be moved on it. It might be a little bit fluffy, it might be hard to nail, but it actually is something that has meaning and resonance for people across this country, and we're going to stick with it. So in that regard, I suppose, just in the context of the new agency, just to say that Aisling talked about it yesterday, there is a lot of good work coming out into the system which we hope will be useful. So that's kind of all I have to say at the sum up. Is that all right? Okay. So just to finish, by way of just thanks, just say thanks to Cormac and Fehin, who's looked after us on the technology side over the last couple of days, and we will have stuff available to people, and tell your colleagues about it at the end of next week, hopefully. To say thanks to Patricia, the conference office, and Friars. To say thanks to our speakers, our workshop presenters, and our chair people who did a really, really top job. And again, the feedback I'm getting is that people have enjoyed the event. Thanks to the centre team, we're so fortunate, myself and Pat Dolan, to work with an exceptional group of people who do fantastic research work, who are dogged in their enthusiasm, and who are I'm very proud of them, and that's not a word I use that often. I don't pride isn't something like that's keen on, but I actually am very proud of that team, and they're brilliant, and they've been a great support to us. Specifically, the conference committee, Bernadine, Carmel, Danielle, Emily, Rebecca O'Shaughnessy, Cormac, who did work for us in hosting until his voice went. I just said Cormac was 42 weeks ago, and we missed it, so congratulations on being 40, Cormac. The ISSP, which is the Irish Social Sciences Platform, which gave us some support for this, in particular James Cunningham. The ongoing support from the HSE, the University and Atlantic Philanthropies, who have been so significant in our lives, and we're so fortunate to have as good a colleague in Jane Foreman, and somebody we can work with really, really well, and it's just a pleasure, Jane, to work with you, just to say that. And obviously, our ongoing contact with Aisling, she's part of our team and she knows that, so I can't see her here, but she's there somewhere, I know. Thanks to yourselves for participating and being engaged. And of course, we're not going to do anything fancy today, but thanks to the person just here on my right-hand side, it's Ivana O'Donoghue. I can't say your maiden name, but you got married, so I can say Ivana O'Donoghue. So just say thanks to Ivana for everything you've done for us. So, our next conference, the new agency will have been established in operation for about a year and a half. We'll do this in 2 years' time. There will be a new Project Life course from this university, and there will be a new Social Sciences Research Institute. And we will be based in a new building. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you again in a couple of years' time to move forward again with the family support agenda. You might do two things for me before you go. You might complete your evaluation sheets. We really want to know what you think about this event, and we want to learn, can we improve it? And the second thing is you might give up these blue fellas on your way out so we can use them again. Thank you very much.